You're listening to Cross-Section of a Human Heart, a memoir of early adulthood, written by Abi Wurdeman and read for you by the author. Introduction. I should begin by admitting I had a full-blown sob fest last week. I hadn't cried like that in a very long time, and I want to say it came out of nowhere, but of course it didn't, because that's not how crying works. There's always an origin, even if you're not aware of it. It happened during a writing session with Phil, my brother/screenwriting partner. I was sitting at my desk telling Phil about a date I'd recently had. The date was with the mortician. That part isn't relevant, it's just fun to say. Anyway, the date was fine. I had no complaints about it, and I was actually telling a pretty chill story until I said something, or maybe Phil asked something, that tapped on some previously unacknowledged nerve. And suddenly, this geyser of angst rushed up from the pit of me. In a matter of seconds, I went from sharing a fun date story to sob-gasping my way through a list of anxieties I did not realize I felt. The short explanation, I think, is that I've stumbled into a transition phase I wasn't anticipating. I'm proactively dating again after about a year and a half of giving all my focus to writing. I'm finally preparing to release a book, this one, after fantasizing about it for years. I'm even starting to feel a vague restlessness, like something in my life needs to snap or break or reverse, but I have no idea what that thing would be. None of these things is bad, but they do all tap into some insecurity. And since they're all happening at the same time, I find that even my genuinely good days are marked by a persistent sense of vulnerability. I feel like I'm constantly walking around with my heart on the outside, clutched in my worried hands. I've been taking a lot of walks while working on this book. Long walks down Ventura Boulevard, past restaurants and nail salons and the home and garden place where I buy incense. Lately, my evening walks have reconnected me with my 20-something self. The sky turns gray-blue and the air softens, and then I'm catching the scent of other people's liquor and other people's garlic fries. Drivers turn on their headlights and I blink in the glow, their over-bright beams coming at me like aggressive possibility. I walk by bars vibrating with eager conversation, and I am suddenly 22. I am following friends into a bar, wondering if Jack and Coke is a cool enough thing to order. I am hesitating outside a networking party, whispering, I am an aspiring screenwriter, trying to find that ever-elusive tone of grown-up confidence. I am leaving a restaurant beside a guy who hasn't kissed me yet, snaking my arm through the space between his elbow and body, dizzied by my own boldness and by the way he tucks his arm to draw me closer. I am nervous. I am excited. I am very afraid of things I can't even name. I expect that in a handful of years I'll have it all figured out, but in this moment, I cannot fathom what figuring it out feels like or how it could even be possible. Then I return home. I walk through my front door and I am 34 again. My go-to drink is Jack and Ginger, and I don't believe drinks can be cool or not cool. I am already a screenwriter, and I don't feel self-conscious for thinking I belong in this career. It didn't work out with that guy, and I know why, and I have no regrets. I no longer drive a car that has its own parts sitting in the back seat. I have a system for tracking my deductible business expenses. I have learned to like Brussels sprouts even without bacon. I do have some things figured out. But there are still moments when I identify with that 22-year-old wandering sidewalks at twilight, wondering how this will all come together in the end. The difference between that young woman and me is that I have already lived through my 20s, through the decade that sat me down and showed me all the parts of my own heart. This is where it cracks when you lose him. This is where you store your indestructible hope. This artery channels shame. This valve is for forgiveness. This buildup is all self-doubt. These are the muscles that keep you going. They never stop. Here comes the worst of your fear. Here are your muscles pumping harder. This is a comprehensive diagram of the entire organ. This is your capacity for love. Now, when I stand clutching my heart in my worried hands, I know what I'm looking at. I know how to define what I feel, how to remember what I'm capable of. I know the invariable truths of who I am. That knowledge is exactly why, at 34, I can incoherently sob rant to my brother about how I don't know where my life is going and still feel a tiny bulb of possibility glowing in the basement of my soul. I've been here before. I've been uncertain and confused and open-hearted and afraid. I know most things break because they have to. I know that if I'm crying today, it most likely means better things are waiting to greet me tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, or 186 tomorrows from now. And I know these things specifically because of the decade I spent squinting into headlights on city streets, terrified and excited about a million unnameable things. 1. That time I analyzed a candle. When my ex-boyfriend came to my college graduation, he brought me a candle. This was all I needed to say when my mother asked how it felt to see him again. I dropped the brown gift bag on the desk in my studio apartment and said, "He got me a candle." "Oh, honey," she said, "I'm so sorry." My dad wanted to know what was wrong with a candle. What was wrong with it was that it had come from someone I dated for 3 years. Patrick knew my most intimate secrets, my private ambitions, my worst habits and best qualities. And yet, here was a gift that said, "Congratulations on your thing, person I barely know." A candle is something you buy when you have to be Secret Santa for that coworker whose name you think might be Connie. A candle is the gift you get for the hostess of a dinner party, and when that dinner party is canceled, you're all like, "No big, I'll just give it to someone else later." Yes, candles are the go-to gift because they're awesome and 98.4% of humans love them, but they're also anonymous, they're transferable, and it's a slap in the heart to get one from someone you wish was still in love with you. It wasn't Patrick's fault. There was no way to win this one. He couldn't very well get me an intimate gift, and if he even analyzed his options half as much as I did, which I am certain he did not, he may have incorrectly but understandably assumed that an impersonal gift was better than no gift at all. So there I was, with a rumpled brown bag containing a soy candle that drove home the reality of our situation. Patrick was letting go, I was hanging on, and anything more personal than a candle had the potential to fill my aching soul with false hope. I should say falser hope. We'd broken things off a couple months earlier with the promise we'd remain close friends and consider rejoining our lives in a few years, after exploring our futures as individuals. I now understand how insane that idea was. Actually, I understood it then too, but having never lost something like a 3-year relationship before, I deluded myself into believing it was a reasonable game plan. I suspect Patrick knew it was all pretend. I'm guessing he signed on for it in the hopes that it would lessen the blow for me, that this plan would offer me peace for the moment, and that, as I went on living my life, I'd find myself gradually less invested in the future I'd imagined with him. Unfortunately, I didn't really do letting go. This was why I'd spent the past year ignoring every instinct that told me this relationship wasn't right for either one of us. I remember hanging out with my girlfriends over Christmas break in my senior year of college, listening to them discuss their upcoming weddings. I tried to imagine the same scenario for myself. The thought of being married to anyone within a year gave me a low-level panic attack, and even more surprising to me, the vision of an entire life spent with Patrick felt off. Not miserable, just inauthentic. Forced. I had no concept of what it meant to give up on something that had lasted that long. I grew up in a Midwestern Lutheran family. Except in the direst of circumstances, my people stay. The person you've chosen to be with is the person you're with, through thick and thin, in sickness and in health, whether you like them today or not. And while I'm definitely not about to complain about the stability and consistency I enjoyed in childhood, it did make me really, really bad at recognizing when something is over and not simply in transition. And so it came to be that poor Patrick was in charge of ending things. Although I was the one to raise the question, he was the one forced to give the answer that yes, in fact, it was time for a break. When I clung to that close friend status by inundating him with phone calls and emails and burdens like, will you still come to my graduation? He was the one who had to work the balance between being supportive and leading me on. When I confronted him again about the actual status of our relationship in a gazebo at our professor's midsummer wedding, it was he who had to tell me it was time to let go completely. This thing was over. It was dead. There was no maybe in a few years. We had had our time, and that time was gone. That summer, which I spent at my folks' home in Texas, was like the moving on montage of a rom-com, but without the hair dye. I made career plans, experimented with new recipes, volunteered with a hospice program, and played hero in a production of Much Ado About Nothing. I still spent drives to and from rehearsals in a fit of tears. I still woke up crying most mornings. I once prepared a bowl of ice cream and then stood at the counter staring at it in a state of spontaneous, grief-induced confusion, suddenly unable to recall what ice cream was for or how I was supposed to use it. The intensity of my heartache fascinated me because I was learning for the first time how it was possible to lose something you didn't want. There's the speech at the end of Swingers, Patrick's favorite movie in college, incidentally, where Rob explains that even once you've gotten over a breakup, you sometimes miss the pain, for the same reason you miss her, because you lived with it for so long. The first time I heard that line, I thought, because you lived with it for so long. Seriously? That's all you lost? The habit of being with someone all the time? After Patrick, it made sense. No matter what your plans are for the future, losing a history is huge. It's a lot to have to go to bed each night knowing that you'll never again wake up to the sound of him in the kitchen listening to car talk and loading pancakes with chocolate chips just for you. There's a weight to suddenly watching hockey games alone, to having to buy your own copies of the DVDs you'd come to consider common property, to realizing that you have a head full of Futurama quotes and no one in your life who will get the reference. You can love something, long for something, find a degree of peace in something, and still know that the only right thing to do is let it all go. Once I stopped staring forlornly at ice cream, our breakup ushered in a 5-year era of singleness for me, during which I discovered the kind of independence, direction, and self-possession that I was never going to find in that relationship. Not because of Patrick, but because of how afraid I was to destroy us through self-actualization. By freeing him from the grip of my long cartoon villain fingers, he opened me up to opportunities I would have denied myself if he'd allowed me to go on fighting for a relationship that was dying anyway. The following summer found me unpacking boxes in my new home in Burbank, California. I emptied the contents of a giant plastic tub to unearth a wrinkled brown bag. For the first time in a year, I took out the candle and examined it. It was soy, given to me at a time when I was particularly into soy candles. It was green, my favorite color. It was in a screw-top jar that reflected my homespun sensibilities. And it was green tea scented, for the girl with the tea obsession. I knew it was still no grand gesture. Patrick had told me himself that he'd picked it up in a store on the way into town the same day he gave it to me. But I also knew that where there is one candle, there are at least 5 others in different colors and scents. His choice was a deliberate one, informed by the time he spent with me. This gift was certainly not intimate, but it would be unfair to suggest that it was impersonal. I lit the candle, set it on my desk, and settled into bed with my latest book on how to make it in Hollywood. Outside my window, a thrilling new world waited for me. Inside, a tiny flame flickered with the sweet scent of necessary endings. How to survive the complete and utter annihilation of your heart. A checklist. 1. Speak of your heartbreak in the most dramatic terms possible. Tell those closest to you that all joy has been sucked from the core of your being, leaving behind the rotting carcass of your heart, lying heavy and cold like a dead possum in the cellar of your soul. Recognize how over the top this is, but indulge anyway, because in this moment, it feels like the truest thing you have ever said. 2. Know that you will feel joy again. You do not have to feel that this is true. You only have to know it. 3. Take one full day to think of nothing but your own grief. The next day, get back on your feet. You can be dazed and depressed, but you can't actively wallow until the end of the workday. 4. When a cry comes on, really lean into it. I recommend going full-on fetal position. Floors are best. If you can get under a piece of furniture or in the corner of an enclosed space like a closet, even better. 5. Keep a tally of how many days you can go without checking your ex's social media accounts. When you've gone a week without looking them up, take a moment to strut around your house with your fists in the air. 6. Haircut. Possibly color too. 7. Download a dating app. Flip through it for 30 minutes. Swipe right on one person. When they message you, burst into unexpected tears and ask, "Why did I think I was ready for this?" 8. Unfriend your ex on social media. Or if that's too aggressive, unsubscribe from their updates. There is nothing on there you need to see, and you will interpret literally everything they post as evidence that they never loved you, do not miss you, and possibly even hate you. 9. Let this breakup inspire hyper-analysis of your life, identity, childhood, and choices. This will make everyone around you crazy, but it will also lead to a declarative statement about how you're no longer the kind of person who waits for happiness to come knocking, and then you'll finally sign up for that class you always wanted to take. 10. Go to a party. Cry alone on the fire escape or in the alley or carport or wherever. When another partygoer happens upon you and asks if you're okay, tell them yes, because you don't really know them well enough to get into it. Let them pretend to believe you. Catch them glancing at you with curiosity when you return to the party 20 minutes later. Wonder if your eyes are red. Wonder if everyone in the room can sense the wet fur coat of your grief pressing on you, swallowing you. Realize you don't care if they can or not. You're just curious. Realize you've reached the point where your sadness is equal parts painful and fascinating. Think all night about how you can't wait to be home by yourself, then stay late to help the host throw away plastic cups and wipe up spilled salsa. Notice how cold and quiet it is when you walk out to your car. Breathe in the cold quiet. Feel better and wiser, not happy, but older, in a good way. Drive home knowing that each party you go to after this is going to be easier. 11. Go to bed every night knowing that tomorrow is going to be a little less painful, just a little. Until one day you wake up and you're fine, and you're not even sure when that happened or how long it's been true. Hey there, I'm Abi Wurdeman. I'm the voice you've been listening to for the last 15 minutes or so. I am also the author of Cross-Section of the Human Heart. Thank you so much for joining me for this. I subtitled the book as a memoir, so now I'm stuck with it, but it's probably more accurate to say that it's a series of personal essays. They go in chronological order, but they all stand alone. So I'm going to be releasing, as I'm creating the audiobook version, releasing one story every week. So if you want to make sure you catch more of them, make sure you subscribe. In the meantime, there's already one available right now. And if you're done listening to me talk, you can jump on over to it. It's called That Time I Volunteered to Annoy People on Their Deathbeds. Long title. And you can probably get to it here or here. I'm still learning YouTube, so I'll figure out how to put the little box where it goes. For now, if you do want to stick around, I have a few bonus stories for you, starting with a story about the mortician. So I didn't mention much about the date in the introduction because it wasn't relevant. And it was true what I said. It was a pretty chill date. I
I was, to be honest, largely in it for his career. I mean, he seemed like a nice guy, but I was also just really interested in talking to a mortician. I've always been really fascinated with um, the rituals of death and how people approach it and process it. Um, anyway, so I'll admit that I asked him a lot of questions about his job at the date. That's probably the story he would tell about me. But afterwards, he walked me to my car, very nice. And as I was getting in my car, he said, "Hey, text me when you get home so I know you got there safely." To me, just immediate green flag, because that's something that the guys just don't have to think about as much. They don't always, and they definitely, it's not something that they ask of someone they just had on a first date. I think they're not thinking about it. They're not that invested in this person yet. Their safety isn't top of mind. So that that thrilled me a little bit. And I told them, I was like, that's, no one's ever asked me to do that on a first date. And and he said, "Oh yeah, I mean, because I don't know, anything could happen to you between here and when you get to your front door." And I was like, "I know." And he said, "And the first place that they always look is the last person who saw you." So not as empathetic as as I thought. And I laughed too. And because I wasn't sure if he was like being cute or funny or something. And he was dead serious. He was like, "I don't, if something, I want to be, I'm going to be worried about it for the rest of the night if I don't know that you're safe and I don't have to worry about the cops coming to my door." So that was that guy. And that didn't bother, I could at least appreciate the candor. Um, but the second date wasn't, I stopped seeing him after the second date. But a few days after the second date, and actually probably about a week after I wrote the introduction for this, I had a date with another guy. Really, really sweet dude. Very, very calm demeanor, pleasant conversation, great listener, asked a lot of questions. Anyway, during the meal, or we met at a burger place, and when the waiter took our orders, I ordered a burger with a gluten-free bun, because gluten legitimately makes me very sick. But this was also at a time where everyone was rolling their eyes at the gluten thing. So ordering gluten-free stuff on a date always made me a little on guard, and like, oh, how are they going to react? He didn't react at all. I assumed he didn't even notice. Small detail, who would notice anyway? So then we did have a second date, and I had planned that one. He was going to plan the second one. So he sent me a text message with links to two different restaurants in his neighborhood. He said, "I narrowed it down to these two. They both have great reviews, and they both have a good gluten-free selection." And dude, it's the small things, right? Like, um, just, without the flair, without the, here's my gesture, just being like, "Hey, I noticed you have this need, so I took it into account when I was making decisions that affect you." That's cool. And that ended up being a really big part of his personality, a big part of who he was and how he approached all his relationships. Really cool guy. Here's us at a party a few years later. The other story that I wanted to tell you is, as I was recording this and I read back, because I haven't read this in years, and I read back over the line about being at this point in my life where I felt like something was about to snap or break or something like that. I do feel like we sense these things. We sense when something is coming, when there's a big change on the way. And meeting my future husband was one of those changes. I wouldn't call that a snap or break. I would call that more of a revelation and a healing. But the other thing that happened just a few months after I wrote that line was I went to visit my parents for Christmas, and my dad kept getting sick the whole time I was there. He kept figuring it was something he ate. His body was getting old, so he couldn't process this thing or this thing or this thing anymore. My mom at one point said to me, this list is getting ridiculous. It can't, I'm worried there's something else going on. And there was, after like a week or two after I got home from that Christmas visit, my parents called and told me that my dad had non-alcoholic cirrhosis of the liver and that he had 2 years to live unless he got a liver donation. As it would turn out, he had a little less than 2 years to live, even with a liver donation. So that period of time, a lot of snapping and breaking. It rearranges who you are. And I, if you know this, if you've taken care of a loved one who is going through a terminal illness, or if you've lost a loved one, it's sort of like, it's not just that the world as you knew it crumbles, it's your sense of self crumbles, because you're not the person you used to be. And so you kind of spend this time wandering about, trying to rebuild, feeling confused and lost, or at least I did. I should probably be using first person pronouns. I don't know your experience, but I do know that my experience has been shared by other people. It was 4 years ago that my dad died, and I am just in this last year starting to feel like I am getting a handle on who I am now after that experience. And I really like her. And I like the old one too, but I feel like this is an upgrade. And that's the goal. And that's kind of what the spirit of this book is about. And it's something I have to keep reminding myself as I do my recordings of a book about my 20s that I wrote at 29, that I edited and turned into a book at 34. And now I'm looking at it and seeing this older version of my voice. There's an instinct to criticize that. Sometimes you want to cringe but that's exactly the feeling you should have. You should look back and be like, oh God, why did I do that? Why did I say that? Because the fact that you have that perspective means that you're getting better all the time. And it means that things have, on occasion, broken you a little bit, and you've been able to rebuild into the incredible person that you are now. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this first story from Cross Section of a Human Heart. I hope that you'll pop in to join me for the next one. I also hope that you will like and subscribe, as they say. And yeah, I will see you next week. Okay.